Hello everyone, this is Superhero Rewind and I'm Captain Logan. Today we're going to take a look at X-Men, the film that kick-started Marvel's onslaught of superhero films throughout the 2000s. Blade was Marvel's first, and it was successful, but X-Men was the first big, popular Marvel franchise that finally made it to the big screen, and not for a lack of trying before that. Back in 1989, James Cameron was supposed to do a version, but the film company he was going to use, which was called Carolco, went bankrupt and the deal fell through. Then Fox decided to buy the movie rights in 1994 after the success of the X-Men animated series. The first script for Fox, penned by Andrew Kevin Walker, was very similar to the arc of stories in the first season of the animated show. The big difference is that besides Wolverine, because, you just can't possibly have a good X-Men film without Wolverine, right? This script used all 5 original X-Men: Cyclops, Beast, Jean Grey, Iceman, and Angel. But that script fell through, and various writers turned in scripts throughout the 90s, including John Logan and Joss Whedon, before Bryan finally took the director's chair, and he eventually did a script with David Hayter, which is what finally made the movie that we have now. Singer didn't even want to do the movie originally. He said that X-Men wasn't intelligent literature. Then apparently he got off his high horse, actually read some comics, and watched the Fox show, and then he decided there was something worthwhile here after all. Singer's version is more serious, more realistic, and really a lot smarter of a film than it might have been without him, and although it bugs me that he first dismissed it, his serious treatment of it makes it mostly respectful to the source material, but also more legitimate to movie fans who might not know anything about the X-Men. My point is that if the movie had been made back in '89 or even in '94, it might not have achieved the same popularity, and Marvel's big string of huge superhero films might not have happened. I give this movie a lot of credit for the fact that superhero is now practically considered a genre in its own right. So here's the plot. Senator Kelly is spearheading a mutant registration act to protect regular humans. Magneto, who believes mutants are better than humans, won't let that happen. So he builds a machine that will turn many of the world's leaders into mutants so that the mutant cause will be theirs as well. Wolverine, meanwhile, meets Rogue, a runaway who steals the life force from anyone she touches. The X-Men rescue them both from Sabretooth and take them back to the X-Mansion, where Wolverine learns who Professor Xavier is and about his school for mutants. Magneto kidnaps Rogue and plans to use her to power his machine. The X-Men finally stop Magneto from turning world leaders into mutants, but not until after he uses it against Senator Kelly, which kills him because his mutation was too unstable. Turns out that's what would have happened to all the world leaders too, but Magneto won't listen to the X-Men when they tell him that. Magneto is put in a plastic prison at the end, but of course, we all know that won't hold him for long. I like the serious tone this film takes. While it certainly has its moments of humor, and it's not above making fun of itself for using character aliases like Cyclops and Storm, there's a part where Wolverine asks Xavier if he goes by Wheels, this is a superhero team that exists for a very serious reason. They're not the super friends helping out just because they can. They have a real cause, not unlike that of Martin Luther King Jr. Singer finds interesting ways to use the X-Men's powers to further the story, rather than the story being just an excuse to show off their powers, like a scene in which Wolverine accidentally stabs Rogue with his claws, and she's forced to use her powers against him to gain his healing powers so she'll survive. I like that it's not an origin film for every single character. We get Rogue's and Wolverine's origins, or at least his origins as far as the X-Men are concerned, but everyone else is firmly established as having worked with Xavier for a long time. There are very strong relationships in this film, most notably between Wolverine and Rogue, which is interesting because it wasn't there in the comics. Here, Rogue is a teenager, but she isn't filled with obnoxious angst. She just doesn't know where she belongs, and she's understandably troubled because she can't touch people or they might die. And Wolverine has similar problems. He doesn't know where he belongs because he's lost his memory. But it's a great pairing, especially since they have opposite powers. I mean, Wolverine heals and Rogue hurts. Professor X and Magneto are handled perfectly, always with affection for each other, even when adversaries. Their argument seems as old as time, and they don't bother debating it for us. Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart are such pros, you know how they feel about each other and the politics of all of this just by looking at them. And they really look like they've known each other all their lives. Too bad they don't have more scenes together. Other relationships aren't so strong. Wolverine here seems to be in love with Jean Grey I guess because he was in love with her in the comics. They don't get enough screen time for me to know why he cares so much. And Cyclops and Jean Grey are a couple, but they barely say 2 words to each other in the movies, so not much chemistry there. Toad and Sabretooth get very little to do, and are reduced to mere henchmen. Sabretooth's backstory with Wolverine is hinted at, but so barely that if you blink, you'll miss it, and if you don't know jack about X-Men comic lore, you'll probably miss it anyway. They both get some cool fights, but I'm not sure why anyone not already familiar with these characters would care. Mystique gets a little more to do, but it's kind of sad to see her as, again, Magneto's henchman. Her comic book counterpart was more of a leader and had a bit of a silver tongue. I can't say her costume, or lack thereof, isn't interesting. Some of the neatest prosthetics I've seen, but it's hard to see Mystique as much more than eye candy. The sequel gives a slight explanation for why she doesn't try to look more human. She says she shouldn't have to, but that doesn't explain why she can't shapeshift some clothes. This is mostly a setup movie. X2 has a much thicker and complex plot. X-Men certainly has a plot, but it spends more time setting up characters than weaving an interesting tale. There's a lot of criticism that Wolverine is overused in all the X-Men movies, and that other X-Men are underused, and I agree with that completely. I like Wolverine, and I love Hugh Jackman's portrayal of him, but we never get enough stuff about Cyclops, who is completely shafted in the next 2 movies, Jean Grey, although X2 does more with her, and Storm, until X3, and after seeing what little is finally done with her there, I wished we'd all kept our mouths shut. My score here is 3 out of 4. This movie is very effective, but not perfect. In some places, it feels more like a pilot for a series than a standalone film. The film's success was great for film, but not great for comics for a while. Marvel seemed obsessed with trying to make its books look more like the movie, so that the characters started wearing black suits, and Wolverine just looked silly for a couple of years. Bryan Singer was right on to not use colorful costumes with these serious themes in the movie, but that doesn't translate at all to the comics. So I'm sure glad those days are pretty much over. Thanks for listening. See you again on Superhero Rewind.